Good afternoon and welcome to Countdown to College. I'm your host, Justin Johnson. Did you know that 52% of entering college freshmen either drop out or transfer before they get their diploma? That's an expensive decision to make. And to help us avoid that kind of expensive mistake, speaker and author Glenda Durano, owner of College Advising and Planning Services. Glenda, good afternoon and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Glenda, when it comes to a student's college choices, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of choices across the country. And in talking about what it is that goes into that kind of decision and what parents are faced with, my first question for you is, Glenda, it's only June. Do we really need to be thinking about this right now?
You know what? I think it's never too early to start thinking about college regardless of what age level you are. But you don't want to think about it so much that the student becomes burnt out. Really, college isn't just about a school. College is about what God wants to do through you. So to me, yes, even I don't care if it's June, I don't care if it's December, because we're always concerned about what God wants to do through us, and so that's why we want to go ahead and do it now. But I'll tell you, college planning works great in the summer because, of course, in the school year, we have school to contend with. We're a lot less flexible with our hours. We can't quite devote the time and the energy that we need to. So for me, I think summer is a fabulous time to begin college planning.
And for a parent who's thinking about the major investment that's in store, summer is a time where they should be able to make time, because it should be our priority right now, right?
It should, because those students who drop out that you referred to, 52% of students who either drop out or transfer to another university, that's a very expensive mistake. And so this should be a priority, students looking at themselves, looking at universities so that they'll find a great match, a school that will be the right choice the first time.
So Glenda, why don't you tell me something about your company, College Advising and Planning Services. What is it all about?
Basically, I'm an independent education consultant, and I help students discover their passions and develop their potential while they're still in high school, so that when they get around to the college search, they can actually find a school that facilitates their intellectual, social, emotional, spiritual, and financial needs. Now, the way we do this is we teach students through various techniques to look at how God has created them and the direction that they might be headed, and then after they've looked inside, they look outside at the schools. But the problem that most kids make is they just start by looking outside, and they've never really looked and really spent some time saying, Lord, what is it that you have for me? So many kids, so many adults freak out in this process. The stress level is huge. And that's because there's a lot of questions that they're asking, and they're starting at the wrong place. They need to start by looking at themselves, and then, once you figure that out, then you can find a good match.
So it sounds like it's not just the answer, but it's also the question that we need to rethink. Instead of, what do you want to do when you grow up? It should be, what does the Lord want you to do?
Oh, that's absolutely true. And speaking of questions, when a student says, okay, where should I go to college? It's not that simple of a question, because when you ask, where do I want to go to college, you're asking, what do I want to study? How big should the school be? How far away from home do I want to be? How much is it going to cost? You are asking about 100 questions. Now, mind you, when a student starts this process, he doesn't know the answer to any of them, right? And so whenever there are unknowns, we get very, very stressed, although the Lord knows the answer. And again, that's why we go ahead and we press into Him. It can be a fabulous growth process. One of the big things that I do as an independent education consultant is I guide students to ask the right questions so they can find the right answers. And it's not just the students, it's the parents too, because it really is a family affair.
And it's not just the students and the parents, but the system that the students are in, whether it be public or private school, has some disadvantages.
It does. As a matter of fact, there was a statistic that came out recently that the average student receives 38 minutes of college advising throughout his entire high school career, and also that the national counselor to student average is 1 to 473.
That seems like a high ratio, my goodness.
It is, and even if it's, let's say, at some of the private schools here in Albuquerque, maybe it's 1 to 150, still if you think about that, one person working with that many students, that many different students in a limited day, it's just not going to happen. They're at a tremendous disadvantage, and a lot of times students need more focus, more assistance, so that they can ask those questions and find the right answers.
So it's no wonder students and their families struggle with this big decision.
It's very normal too. But the thing is there's help out there, and we don't want students to struggle. We don't want this to be a time of fear and frenzy and worry and going, what in the world's going to happen? This should be one of the most exciting times in a student's life, because they're getting ready to step out. And what does God have for us after high school? College is a fabulous experience, and we want those kids to experience it in a wonderful way, not in a way of stress and worry and not having the right match.
And stress and worry come from our approach sometimes. So what are some of the most common problems, Glenda, that you see in the college planning process?
Well, probably the most common one is what I've spoken before, and that is that students basically start by looking at schools instead of themselves, and that's probably number one. Number two is they wait till it's way too late. And whenever you have to rush through a process, because this is a process, it causes a whole lot of stress. Another problem that I see, students when they apply, they should really target where they want to apply to financially. And a lot of times students just get out there and choose schools and don't really try to discern where they are in the applicant pool. And that's a very, very important thing. And one other thing that is very just overwhelming in New Mexico, to me a problem, is that students put huge limits on themselves. And what I mean by that is that students say, well, we got the lottery scholarship, so I'm going to go here in New Mexico. And the lottery scholarship can be fabulous, but what I would tell people is, have you prayed about it? And are you sure that these are the schools here in state where you're supposed to go? Only 10% of students actually graduate with the lottery scholarship intact, and yet there are many other things that we can use here in New Mexico as well as out of state in order to get us to have an affordable education.
You're listening to Countdown with College with speaker and author Glenda Durano. Glenda, one quick question before our next break, but I was wondering, in all of this, how does a student answer the question, what would they like to do? Is passion even considered anymore?
Among the colleges it is, but unfortunately a lot of times what we say in high school or when students are growing up, we call them interests. Well, an interest is very different from a passion. We are multifaceted individuals. God made us that way, so we have a lot of interests. But what a passion is something that will carry you through. It's not that it won't be hard. It's not that it won't take a lot of time, but it will be worth it because you're really working in those gifts. And the other thing about a passion is it won't just be something that you're interested in. It will be something that you're great at, because what a passion is it's not about the wonderful thing that you're going to go do for God, but it's about having God work through you. And that's why it just comes, and we discover our passions experientially, and that's why so few students, so few adults, as a matter of fact, know their passions, because they never really walked in them to discover them. And so one of the things that I do with high schoolers is, even if they are walking in the wrong direction, and that's in quotes, if they're walking, at least God can help them turn the corner. Whereas if they're just sitting there doing nothing, it's kind of hard for God to pick them up and give them a whap on the behind and say, get walking. So they've got to learn to walk. And it may seem like an interest first, but by walking in that, you can eventually discover those passions, because you'll know it when it hits you.
In just a moment, we're going to find out from speaker and author Glenda Durano where she thinks parents should be right now with the college planning process. You're listening to Countdown to College. You're listening to Countdown to College with speaker and author Glenda Durano, the owner of College Advising and Planning Services. Glenda, I know it's only June, but you recommend that a student start his applications in August, which is not that far away. Why so soon?
Well, a lot of students think, well, the deadline's not till February or March or even April at some schools, so there's no rush about it. But the reason that why I recommend that students finish their college applications by November, that means they start them in August, is so that a student can be more eligible for merit-based aid. If a student actually submits his applications by November 1st, around December 1st, all of the college admissions advisors sit around the table and they sort of start doling out their merit-based aid. And if we are concerned about finances, which most of us are, if you're first in line, you're a lot more likely to, one, get a bigger package, and two, get it at all, because they know that you are really interested in the college and they want to help the students who are more interested in the universities. So if you go on and apply early, then they'll know that you're interested, so it works in your behalf. Plus that way it's over with and you don't have to do it anymore. And if you go ahead and begin in August, then you don't have to worry about anything there really in the spring, and you're all finished with it.
I remember my buddies and I staying up late nights in late March trying to get those applications in on time, and it really put a lot of stress when it came to finals.
It does, and the other thing is it doesn't really present you in the best light, because anybody who rushes through something isn't going to do their best work. And we want people to work in a very relaxed atmosphere so they can really present the person behind the paper. They need to really show who they are.
Now, I get the feeling, Glenda, that I really haven't put as much thought into what it takes to prepare for the right college. If parents are out there and thinking, you know what, I need to get on the ball here, what other kind of workshops or what other kind of avenues can a parent take to get more information?
Well, I am an individual education consultant, and so I do work a lot one-on-one with students. That's probably the primary thing that I do, and we have a series of appointments where I lead them through assessments. I will actually develop a list of schools for that student, and then together we narrow them down and I walk them through the college process. That's one thing that I do. But also I do a lot of public workshops, very reasonably priced, here in New Mexico and also in Oklahoma, and I work with students. Usually they're about 5 hours, and we go through the process where they actually learn some of the tools that they can use. If they feel like they would prefer not having one-on-one counseling, if they would just prefer working in a group, more interactive, so to speak, we also do workshops. Another thing sometimes that I do is I'll go out and I'll speak to youth groups, to Christian school groups, and just give out information, because a lot of times there's so much information out there, people don't know where to start, so I can give them a really good starting point too.
Now, my student is 10th grade. Is my student the right age, or what age would you recommend for attending the workshop?
Absolutely, rising junior, rising senior, because in the workshop we talk a lot about not just the self-assessment, but then starting to look at the college criteria. A student should be able to, in his freshman and sophomore year, that's when you do the self-exploration, kind of developing those passions so that you start to show some real focus. The summer after the student's sophomore year, before the junior year, that's a very important time when a student should start thinking about, okay, I have these passions, I have these interests, I have these abilities. What kind of school do I need? What facilities in a school do I need in order to help those grow, in order to help give me a better sense of purpose, not just get a degree? And so you do that before the junior year. Then during the junior year, you actually narrow down that list of colleges. You usually start with about 30 or sometimes 40, then you narrow it down to about 10. And so then by the end of your junior year, you've also finished your testing, you've narrowed down your colleges, then you start working on that college application, and it's in by November of the senior year.
Now, that sounds like a whole lot of work to avoid a whole lot of work. So tell me, what can I get out of a workshop like this? Because you did mention there is a cost involved for this investment, and what would I get that my students are not already getting in high school?
Basically, there are proven tools and tactics that a student can use in order to write his essay, get financial aid, various things like that. And in high school, students learn about the tools, but it's very different. There's a big difference between having the information and knowing what to do with it. And I teach students what to do with it, and I don't just talk about it. We actually sit down, for example, and do mock interviews. We practice how do you ask a person for a letter of recommendation. So it's practicing those skills and then being able to stop and ask and reassess and say, okay, you did this, but do you see the message that this sends? So we actually practice those in the workshop, as well as, well, I'll do that individually too with my students.
So it goes back to time, spending a little bit of money now can help our students avoid big, costly mistakes later.
Tremendous, yes, absolutely.
What is your basic philosophy of education, Glenda?
My basic philosophy of education is that I believe education exists in order to facilitate a student's God-given passions. And what I mean by that is college isn't just about planning for a career. It's really about spiritual application. It's about learning how to answer the call that God has put on your heart. It's a wonderful time of transition, a wonderful time of exploration. I do know that college isn't for everybody, but for those that God does lead in that direction, it's a tremendous time of spiritual growth and really launching out into the calling that God has for you.
Now, Glenda, I had to be a skeptic here, but I've done the spiritual gift surveys. Is that what this is all about?
It's not what it's all about. We do spiritual gift surveys. We also do personality assessments and interest assessments and learning style assessments. But those assessments, those things that are on paper, because they can be very, very biased, and a lot of times they're incomplete actually. And when we look at ourselves, we have blind spots. Sometimes they do offer a starting point, but like I said, you really do discover these things experientially, so you have to walk in those and discover them. But that's only a part of it, because then you also want to, for example, I'll ask a student, do you want to go to a big school or a small school? And they may say, I want to go to a big school. And so we talk about that a little bit and talk about some other things. But people can say one thing, but their behavior is what really tells the truth. So later on, as we're talking, I'll say, so do you learn best by lecture and taking notes, or do you learn best by discussion? And if he goes, well, I love discussions. And then I may ask him, so do you feel comfortable raising your hand in a class, or would you rather just sit back and listen to everybody else talk? He says, oh, I love raising my hands and I contribute. Then I'll point out the disconnect there about how he said he wanted a large school where a lot of times classes are 250, 350 students, and yet you said this is the type of learning style that you want. So it's not that I'm trying to say, you're wrong, I'm just trying to point out our behavior doesn't lie, and that's what ultimately we need to do that. So we need to do some motivational interviewing in order to get them to answer the way that really tells the truth about what they want.
So all put together, Glenda, when you're looking at the whole picture that a student presents of themselves and that you help them bring out for themselves, how does this help them become more attractive to colleges and universities out there?
Well, there used to be a saying that colleges want well-rounded students. That is no longer the case. In fact, there's a little saying that goes around at universities. They want a well-rounded class of very pointy students. Universities want students who have demonstrated some passion, who have demonstrated some focus, who've demonstrated some potential. These days, it is no longer good enough, honestly, to say, I'm interested in pre-med, and yet you've never volunteered at a hospital, you've never done a science fair project, you've never worked as a file clerk at a chiropractor, you've never demonstrated that interest and those abilities. Universities want students to succeed too, and it's one of the saddest things, not only for students but also for universities, for a student to start on a track and then realize they're on the wrong track. So we really want to get them focused in high school when it's not as expensive to get focused, because we're not spending thousands of dollars every semester, and then they can show that focus and really demonstrate that to the universities, because universities want students to succeed too.
You're listening to Countdown to College with speaker and author Glenda Durano. In just a moment, we're going to find out where you should be and what an upcoming college workshop might have in store for you. You're listening to Countdown to College with speaker and author Glenda Durano. Glenda, college universities are so expensive, even here in New Mexico. Even if your student is a lottery scholarship recipient, there are still added costs and expenses that are involved. That's the biggest concern that parents that I talk to seem to have these days. What kind of advice can you offer for those parents?
Probably the most important thing I would tell them is to make sure that the student targets the university. You see, the chances for a student to get merit-based aid, there's several types of aid. There's need-based and merit-based, but merit-based is the student can really have some control over. And what a student wants to do is make sure that he is in the top 25% of the applicant pool, especially regarding his test scores, because once he's in that top 25%, he suddenly magnifies his chances for financial aid just exponentially. Now, there are ways to find that out, and I talk about that when I do the one-on-one counseling, and we also talk about that in the workshops. It's very important that the students target that. Another very important aspect is actually saving properly, and when I talk to parents, I talk to them about the right way to save and the smart way to save and the not so smart way to save. And another way that students and parents can cut the cost of college is by doing outside scholarship searches. So there's really a lot of ways. In fact, I've told people, and maybe this sounds a little haughty, but I don't think there is any reason a student should have to pay full price for a university if he really is doing that college planning the way that he should.
One of the things that you've mentioned over and over again in our time together today, Glenda, is what God's plan is for a student's life. I get the sense that maybe a college search for a Christian might be different from that of a non-Christian?
It's definitely different. At least it should be different, because when we are looking at universities, first of all, we certainly bathe the whole process in prayer. And it really is about looking to God and figuring out what He wants. So many times as individuals, we say, "Oh God, what's your will for me? What's your will for me?" And that's okay to ask, but you know, when God wants to get to know us, it's more than not just so that we can know His will, it's so that we can know Him. And then we can, when we really know Him, when we press into Him, we will know, because we are His sheep, we do hear His voice, and we will know what He wants us to do. And we can do all of our planning, but He will order our steps, and that's exactly what we want. If a student is a Christian, it should really be about developing that relationship with the Lord and asking Him to lead you in the entire process. And it's very easy to get off track when we're looking at me and how good am I and what will the university think about me. We really need to keep our focus on the Lord, and that's one thing I do in the workshops, in the individual counseling, and also in my book, The Christian's Guide to College Admissions. That's because there I walk students through week by week, step by step, juniors and seniors, of what a task that they need to do every week, but then I offer a corresponding devotional, because it's so important that we keep our eyes on God.
You're listening to Countdown to College with speaker and author Glenda Durano. Glenda, we are convinced, we're parents and we have children in high school. We need to build a relationship with you and get to know you better. How can we find you online, and what's your phone number?
My website is collegeadvisingandplanning.com, and it's a very interactive website. I also have an e-newsletter that people can subscribe to. So every month I write an article about something that has to do with college planning, and that's absolutely free. I also have a schedule. It's called Upcoming Deadlines, and basically if a student will get on my website, they will see whether they're a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, what they need to do that month. It's sort of in general terms, but that month in order to stay on track. So a person can contact me through my website. They can also contact me through email. My email is glendadurano@gmail.com. And they can also call me. I'm open to phone calls, and if you have to leave a message, it's just because I'm in a session, and my phone number is 918-7669. That's area code 505-918-7669.
Now, Glenda, we have just a few more moments left with you today. I want to ask about how you got started advising parents and their students about going to college. It started somewhere, and where does your passion come from?
It did. You know, when my younger student went to college, I had home educated for 20 years. I've also taught at universities, various things. I really didn't know what the Lord had for me. And so I just sat and prayed and just wasn't sure. And then one day a thought occurred to me, well, maybe I need to continue communicating about education, because my students had had very successful college planning processes. There's 2 of them, and they had been offered a total of about $500,000 worth in scholarships. That's what they'd been offered, and all my friends had said, boy, how did you do this? I want to learn how. So I would help them. And so I began thinking, maybe that's what I need to do. So I started on some training, and the minute that I actually took a step, it was as if God opened up the door and the floodgates just totally opened. joining organizations and getting my certification in this, and it's just so exciting because I get to talk to other people every day, other consultants nationwide who have the same passion for students, and it's so exciting when a student and a parent really get it, to know that it's not just about a degree, it really is about preparing that student for what God has for that student, and so that's very exciting to me.
So your first success story started home.
It did. It did.
Absolutely. We opened the program today, Glenda, with a statistic that 52% of incoming college freshmen either drop out or transfer, which indicates that they didn't choose correctly the first time around. How much can a mistake like that actually cost?
Unfortunately, it can cost thousands of dollars. I would say an absolute minimum would be $6,000 to $7,000, but I'd say more regularly it probably costs in the upper teens, like $15,000 or $20,000 even. Because if a student gets on the wrong track, then it'll take time, money to get back on the right track. He'll have to retake some classes, he'll have to move again, all sorts of things. And then of course for those students who do drop out, it's really very difficult to measure, but that's very significant as far as the earning power in that student's lifetime if they decide not to do it, or then if they decide to do it later. It's just a tremendously expensive decision.
So I don't have any kids of my own, but let's say like before, if I were a parent and I had a 10th grader or 11th grader in high school right now, and if I could spend a little bit of money now to make sure that I had a seat at one of your upcoming workshops, and save thousands of dollars down the road, why wouldn't I make sure I had a seat in your workshop?
Well, I'd love to know that. To me, there's no reason, because really it's extremely, the cost is extremely nominal, and not only that, students end up with a workbook afterwards. It's pretty thick, and so students end up with a timeline, so they've got the tools, they've got the training, they know what they can do, and they can proceed on to college planning success.
I've heard it said, Glenda, that 90% of any project is getting started. So this workshop helps them get 90% of their project finished.
It certainly does. That's a great way to think about it.
So coming up, look for Glenda Durano, speaker and author and owner of College Advising and Planning Services. Glenda, one more time, because I know some of us were grabbing a pen and paper last time you mentioned, but how can we get a hold of you, and where can we find out about your next Countdown to College workshop?
Yes, my phone number is area code 505-918-7669. That's 505-918-7669. I'm also on the web at collegeadvisingandplanning.com, or my email is glendadurano@gmail.com.
Glenda, one last piece of advice. I'm a parent of a high school student. What's the number one thing I should be focused on right now as my college student in planning gets ready for college?
That he's pursuing his passions actively, that he is experientially discovering those passions so that he can find a university then that will facilitate those passions.
Glenda Durano, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.